Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. We'll do a warm-up session for about an hour and then we'll jump into the video game news. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. I haven't been saying the year lately, but probably wouldn't hurt to say the year. Third year anniversary is still going on in Yu-Gi-Oh! Here, giving away small amounts of rewards, but not really anything that matters too much. Speaking of not mattering, this selection really doesn't matter because you just have no idea what pack you're actually selecting. So it really is just wasting your time. Speaking of wasting my time, playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, which is probably the last of the major collectible card games I'll ever manage to play. It's getting a little bit more boring and annoying. That there's some weirdness in it, certainly in that if you wanted to be a free-to-play player, which is all I'm willing ever to really do, the amount you just have to grind each day to hit the maximum, which then stops you from being able to grind any further, is just really high with not much of a motivation to do that. Meanwhile, the current event to win gold requires 45 wins, which is just a massive amount of wins when you start getting into actual competitive play. And then there's just generally nothing else to do in Pokemon TCG Pocket, which just makes the whole experience seem oddly imbalanced and just not well thought out. The trading system, by the way, is also horribly misthought out, but I think in part, let's go ahead and just start scrolling down the 24-hour concurrent top played games. It's also worth pointing out that there's a major Japanese specific problem in Pokemon TCG Pocket, and it is the fact that particularly Japanese people, not exclusively, but particularly Japanese people, do not have the social upbringing to reject other people or say no to other people. So now that they've implemented the trade system, it is very much the case that you will initiate a trade offer with somebody and they will just do nothing and wait out the expiration timer of several days, which is kind of ridiculous. It almost certainly means that there isn't much of a pop-up that happens when you launch the game that makes you deal with it immediately. The trade system is already terrible in that you really can't trade for anything you want, but particularly when people just don't want to interact in that way, people in general, they're just going to take up your one and only trade slot, which would make a lot more sense since there are wait timers anyways to trade, and they've just bent over backwards to avoid bots using the trade system. It would make a lot of sense to have more trade slots to be able to at least have 2 or 3 trades going on at the same time. And this effectively has ruined what was otherwise just a generic friend system in Pokemon TCG Pocket down to a system where you have to unfriend anybody who does not trade with you. Otherwise, you're just going to accidentally make trade offers to that person over and over again. And you might as well just start with anybody with Japanese in their name. The other reason is, unless you have a specific desire to get Japanese cards, you really don't want to trade with them because they'll give you Japanese language versions of the cards and you'll get English versions of the cards, which is probably not what most people want anyways. There are other languages of the Pokemon cards, but generally I don't think you're going to run into too many people like that. The Wonder system is going to also cue you into which kinds of friends you have that are opening non-English versions of the cards, and through the Wonder system you also are going to have to start unfriending people, which the Wonder system is an interesting system, certainly, as far as just trying to make it a little bit easier for people to get better cards out of collections. But then some of the cosmetics too are too expensive to grind for, and so I have like 16 days now where I'm gonna have to really grind to get the cosmetic things you can get for free, ignoring the fact that there's plenty of paid cosmetics you're not going to get for free. And as for the actual card game, the meta has changed a little bit with the new expansion, as one would expect, but not really that much that you can't play the previous meta pretty well if you don't have the cards for the new meta or haven't figured out the new meta. And certainly the new cards haven't like drastically changed the card game too much. You also have the problem of it just really being the case that most free-to-play players are not going to have enough of the new cards to play until probably you get very close to the next expansion. And that feeling of just always being behind is going to be a thing. Here's Phasmophobia, a game I spent last stream confusing with Phasmagoria, a much older live action game. Okay, well, for the catch-up section, let's see. I'm still watching High Potential, the English version of High Intellectual Potential, and it does seem like after about the 6th or 7th episode, they start to tell murder stories that are new. In particular, there's a story that is written where the police station gets taken over by gun-wielding bad guys. And that's, I think, completely new and something that you would just kind of assume French people wouldn't expect to ever really happen in a French police station. And certainly High Potential taking it to California, having a bigger police station overall, just having more people overall, opens up that door. But yeah, I think that is probably the pivot point. It very well could have been the case that this was a rush job, in the sense that they greenlit an English production of it. They got the rights to the first 5 or 6 murder cases and had writers working for those for 4 to 5 weeks writing new stories to supplement it. It may be also an episode count number issue, and it may be that they intertwine some of the previous murder cases back into the season while adding their own, which is not the worst idea ever. It really is an issue only specifically on streaming, where you have the possibility of watching a dubbed version of the French version at the same time or before the English version. Had it been a couple decades previous, ABC would have gotten away with it completely without anybody really even knowing about there being an original French version. But yeah, it is nice to see them going in, telling new murder mystery stories. That being said, I also wonder if it's not going to matter too much and the main beats of the overarching story is still going to be pretty much the same. It also might be a thing where it just gets drug out like the Monk series, which I would say the English version of High Potential, as the character is becoming less and less of a characterization of a mess and more of a just generic woman. Like, yeah. I don't know if there's a better way to say that, and that now that I hear it out loud, it does sound kind of awkward to say that, but yeah. She really just comes off as a generic mom character now, instead of this person who has this made up disease, high potential, that also seems very much like some form of ADHD, in which she can't actually get her life together and has a general bad attitude and just is generally socially awkward. Which, yeah, the will they won't they romance with the main detective also doesn't feel like it's being done particularly fast. So yeah, the story might divert quite a bit. It may just go on forever. I wouldn't be surprised if I actually sat through all the mini seasons of Monk, if you wouldn't pretty much realize that after a couple seasons Monk gets much better and less OCD and germophobic and just afraid of everything, and just becomes a generic detective. Yeah. So yeah, I've been watching that. I tried to watch an episode of Luther. I don't think I'm gonna stick with that, though, as far as another murder mystery type show. I guess that's the kick I'm currently on. Made some phone calls, none of which really told me what I wanted to hear. In particular, I've been talking about cleaning and decluttering this house. I talked to an estate sale person, and they basically looked around and said, yeah, you're gonna have to sort all of this out by yourself, more than likely, and then call somebody else, because of all the stuff I have, which I kind of think is a massive amount of kitsch. It is still, by their definition, really just garage sale stuff. And yeah, that's probably the case. And if you try to garage sell anything, you're going to get at best $1 for things that very possibly were you paid $20-$30 for. Even recently, it would be a huge loss if you're selling things that are 20-30 years old, then that are more antique-ish or approaching a third of their way towards being an antique. Those two will just not be worth the value. And inherently, the estate sale person said this, and I imagine this is the case, is that if you're going to have an estate sale, people are just going to wander all around your house. So my effort here to have anything and keep anything in the house and lock things in different rooms is going to be a difficult thing to implement and enforce, as people are just going to wander around. And so, I mean, that's really not that doable, except for desperate people who are just willing to completely clean out a house, and frankly extremely rich people that are going to have just a lot of stuff. And I would say there's probably 3 houses worth of stuff in this house that needs to go away. So of that, I would say you're talking 1,500 square feet potentially worth of stuff. Let's just roughly say that. You might need closer to 3,000 square feet of stuff to have an estate sale, at least for this guy. Like, he was targeting that he wanted to sell gross at least $2,000 worth of stuff, and looking at everything that I could show him, he said there wasn't even $2,000 there, which is certainly a shame, but hard to particularly argue too. Inherently, there was, I won't even say a huge generational thing as much as there are just some people that are sold on kitsch and antiques. Let's go ahead and go through this day in history like they are going to be some value, and they will invest way too much cash, which would have been better spent in a savings account buying kitsch and antiques, which there's some level of decoration that's certainly fine if it makes you happy. Like, unless you're going for the minimalism thing, I'm not gonna say you shouldn't have paintings on the wall. Arguably, unless you're super rich though, those paintings should just be prints and duplications, reproductions. They shouldn't be originals, and even at that, they shouldn't be in very high cost or very fancy frames. Shouldn't be paying for custom framework to be done on a print, which in a lot of cases, buying prints, that's exactly where you're going to get screwed, is you're going to be paying way too much for something that probably is worth $20 at most. And any kind of resale, which the resale is almost certainly going to be at least half of what you paid for it. Probably way less than that. But yeah, once you hit a point where you've just got like a whole separate set of Christmas decorations for your entire house, you've gone too far. When you have entire extra rooms that you're decorating, you've gone too far. I will fully admit that, even having a full room full of Lego. But yeah, there's just a lot of money that can be wasted there, certainly. And I would always suggest a level of decoration that should be somewhat minimalist. I don't live that way myself, but it does make some sense, like, to not be drowned in a room with items. So yeah, I very well may have a garage sale and call it an estate sale and see if that can raise the prices in any way. But also, even in that, I probably am going to end up spending more money than I make just hiring people to run a garage sale. But yeah, at some point, it may very well be the case that it's worth just getting rid of items to have an empty home that can be rented out. Which I've also been told by people who potentially don't really know that the amount I was hoping to rent this home for, these rooms out for, is way too high. And I can anticipate only even less money, which, yeah, is pretty much the response I get from any case, is that you're screwed this way, you're screwed that way, you're screwed this way. I think that my situation isn't particularly that different from too many other people, only perhaps becoming increasingly more drastic. I also found out that since I am disabled by my own definition, if regardless of whether the US government wants to agree to it or not. But if you don't have, I believe it's 20 quarters, you don't qualify for Social Security disability. There is a supplemental security insurance or something like that called SSI, I think, that you might qualify for. But you only qualify for that if you literally only have $2,000 to your name in anything, including retirement plans, including savings accounts, which is just an insanely small amount of money. That, yeah, the only people that would possibly qualify for that would be people who are absolutely homeless, living on the street, or just completely dependent on other people paying bills as such. Depending on where you live, it's practically impossible that you could pay bills and have less than $2,000. Plus, certainly, none of those programs are going to give you any kind of significant amount of money, $200, $400 a month. There are literally no safety nets in the United States for many, many people, and it is a cruel capitalistic system designed to just let people starve to death intentionally. And on top of that, there is a high level of denial of that fact. There is high levels of implication that there are churches out there or other kinds of charities out there that are actively helping people. There are churches and charities that are helping people, but they are not doing enough. They often have ridiculous rules, just they're inconsistent with who they help. And certainly there's just no rules and regulation when you allow social support systems which need to be run by the government and funded by richer people who pay taxes. Once you just take it out of the hands of any kind of, I mean, even if it was just a city council oversight there's just a lack of efficiency and a lack of oversight. And you may complain, certainly, and often right, that the government is inefficient, but when there is zero oversight, I guarantee you that small independent charities are way less efficient, and they just don't have to prove it. But yeah. So yeah, that certainly hasn't been any good news in the past couple of days. Working with a probate lawyer, and the guy doesn't even mention that there's a 3% convenience fee on several $100s. Well, no, several $1,000s. So you sign a contract and expect to be charged some amount, and then to see that the charge is 3% more than that amount that's on the contract is certainly surprising and irritating and ridiculous. Certainly, that for the amount of money that's being processed there, you're charging convenience fees and not absorbing that cost yourself like so many other places do. And pretty much every other store does that. You don't go to a restaurant and they say there's a 3% convenience fee for using a credit card, and usually there is a 3% fee to stores for that they are giving up when they run a credit card, but the amount that is on the receipt is the amount that gets run, and the store itself just loses that. And inherently, if you sign a memorandum, really, not even a contract, it wasn't notarized, for a certain amount, and then you're charged over the amount, then that memorandum is what they would call voidable, as my understanding of the law. Which, yeah, that certainly creates this weird situation where I'm hoping this lawyer does what I need him to do, but also there might be a thing where he just takes the money and runs and is shady. And there might be a thing where I just have to try and somehow chase after him to get that money back, because certainly can't be robbed for several $1,000s. I literally would have to file a police report against them, I imagine, and initiate a chargeback with the bank if he actually doesn't get anything done. So yeah, nothing's really going right in my life for past, heck, several months, several years, the beginning of it to the current point. Yeah. And I'm just increasingly being filled with anxiety of what ifs, of what are the worst case scenarios. There is definitely a scenario here where I'll never be able to rent out the house, and I'm just gonna, I don't know, just live in it and enjoy, be retired for maybe 10 years, and then I'd run out of cash and just starve to death. Which honestly isn't as bad as it sounds, because inherently people get forced, either they get forced into a mentality of working until they're 65 to retire, and then by the time they're 65 they are so unhealthy that, or if not dead already, that they really can't enjoy retirement. So yeah, potentially working for another 10 and 20 years to then live the last 10 years of your life being unhealthy and unhappy is not inherently the best trade-off. Like, burning longer as a candle is not always as good as burning brighter. Of course, certainly that's not the ideal outcome. And you can say you're willing to potentially just run out of cash and starve to death, but in reality, that's not going to be a pleasant experience at all. Does any of that have anything to do with video games? So, no. Not really. That's where my head has been out for the past couple days, though, and so I really haven't been doing too much else. I've been cleaning and decluttering. Still working on the Google Sheets, Google Forms sign-up sheet. If I'm fairly lucky, I'll be fairly done with that. As far as just a little experiment. And then maybe I could revert back to messing with the Godot engine and making that clock app as a distraction, or maybe I'll just move on to another distraction. But yeah, there's not really a ton I can say about the Google sign-up sheet, in that I'm still just kind of working on it, and maybe at some point I'll actually show it off. Just a lot of adaptation, rewriting code to maybe make it a little bit more optimized, and just adding more charts and moving things around. squishing what could be several different sheets into one sheet that way. There's just like one one sheet that is potentially for like board games, and then one sheet for video games, and one sheet for card games, and just has several different charts. It has several different bits of information there. Certainly, as I'm developing this, I'm thinking, can I make this fairly compact to work on a smartphone? Because Google Sheets on a smartphone is very much a different beast than on desktop. But also on desktop, it's actually going to be able to show the charts and things like that without it being incredibly tiny and unreadable. Yeah. It is interesting to see that Google Sheets has added new features in the past couple of years, but their charts in particular still seem to be kind of disconnected, and their forms responses still just don't make a lot of sense as far as how you tweak things. What you really would expect is for somebody that has only a minimal understanding of Excel or Google Sheets to be able to make a form, and then from making a form get usable data out of that form just in the form responses sheet alone. You wouldn't expect that you then have to go through. Let's move on to my chart for a second here. Yeah, you wouldn't expect that you then would have to go and take the data from the form responses sheet and move it to a different sheet to kind of compress the data and merge it all together and manipulate it, for then that second sheet to then be used to make a third sheet, potentially a fourth sheet from that data, and just iterations on iterations on iterations. But I find in Excel that's very often the case, is that you either do that in a function where it's not actually being shown, the middle steps aren't being shown if you don't need to show the middle steps, or you're doing it by having more and more sheets. And it makes a problem where there is a limitation on the number of cells in any one sheet. So data could get very large. And certainly that is a problem. If the sign-up sheet somehow did start to become fairly popular and people were filling it out like crazy, yeah, if this was like PewDiePie putting out a sign-up sheet type thing, it would probably be overfull of data very quickly. Which you probably would just do smaller polls on YouTube if you were PewDiePie and get enough feedback that way. I heard a statistic I'd never heard before, that if you survey more than 12,000 people, maybe in the United States, maybe in the world, you're wasting your time, because by the time you've gotten a response from 12,000 people, you're getting down so far into the 0.00009th decimal point that it just doesn't really matter. It's just not financially worth it. That is probably based on people sending out mail-in paper surveys, though. And if you were doing something online, having more than 12,000 respondents probably is very valuable. More data is usually considered better overall. But yeah. For my purposes, if I really was going to do a sign-up sheet thing, I don't know what I'd really get out of it. What purposes it would be other than just having people's emails to email them when there's new video out, so that they're certain they get notifications. And getting more data. Inherently, the survey, because it's asking, like, what are your favorite kinds of genres in games? As a content creator, you could take that information and start playing those types of games if you're incredibly flexible. But in my case, I'm too stubborn and stuck in my ways to really say, oh, I'm getting major feedback that people love military first-person shooters, I should go play Call of Duty all the time. No way would I heed that feedback and do anything from it. If anything, it would just be a signal that I have somehow magically gotten the wrong audience from what I was targeting or trying to get. But yeah, it inherently depends on what kind of content creator you want to be and what kind of content you're willing to cover and make. And I think a lot of other content creators might very well start playing military first-person shooters if their fan base loves that kind of content. Yeah. Oh, there was something else I was gonna say, and I'm slipping my mind now. Yeah. Oh yeah, I did hear, moving around the kind of podcast I listen to, and I'm listening to a PC building podcast, but formerly of tested Will Smith, who's done a lot of things, talk about this new Telestrator plugin for OBS that's not particularly that new. Seems like it came out maybe 6 months to a year ago, but it does an interesting thing from the description. I don't have time to really play around with that. If I'm going to start playing around with things, I would work on making my macros work more, or do follow list cleanup or anything else, or actually make pre-recorded footage for my YouTube channel, to schedule pre-recorded footage for my YouTube channel. But at some point, I probably will play around with this Telestrator app. It uses WebRTC, which was a protocol established so that browsers, modern browsers, like Firefox and Chromium-based ones like Chrome and Edge, could stream video for like live cams and the kinds of, I want to say Google Meet, but that's not the biggest program most people use. Skype like programs, things like that. Although I don't think that Skype actually probably uses WebRTC as a protocol and probably has its own application and its own protocol. Regardless, the Telestrator app, as I understand it, has you open the browser window after you install this plugin for OBS on your main computer. That is going to be your capture window for drawing over the screen like they do in football games, in case Telestrator is not something you're familiar with, which most people, maybe it isn't off the top of their head. Jump King Quest. Is this from the same maker as Jump King? Then what you do after opening a browser window, which I'd assume you're opening that in full screen, you open another browser window on any tablet-like device or touchscreen-like device that you have, and go to a certain URL, I would assume. What is the response right now? Still very positive for Lollipop Chainsaw Repop. It's also doing well. And so on your tablet-like device, the browser window lets you see what is happening probably on your first screen of your main computer. And so you can then draw over what you're seeing probably on your first monitor and put in little notes like they do in football commentary. And then OBS would be capturing not what is on the first screen, which would just be the game footage. Normally you just get a game capture for that. But is instead capturing on probably your second screen. It certainly would be easier if you had two screens with the same resolution to do this. That web browser on your computer. And that web browser on your computer is going to be echoing what you see on the tablet. Which is a very interesting thing. But admittedly, it also is a thing that very few people, depending on what games you're playing, are going to take to major advantage of. Like, inherently, I've done a ton of stuff to let me show off browser pages when covering the news, like where I am right now. And if I wanted to highlight something and draw all over the screen, I would just use my plugin to bring up the magnifier app in Windows and show it and have it be magnified. Or I would just draw the mouse in a circle around it. Is there possibly some hotkeys where you could bring up and draw on the screen in Windows 10 on top of that? Very possibly. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of Control-Alt-Shift print screen app that would let you take a screenshot instead of live video and draw all over it. But there might very well be a draw over the screen function even for just the live window. You could certainly just press print screen and then go paste the screenshot you took by pressing print screen into Microsoft Paint and draw over it that way. But I've never actually thought of a scenario where I really needed to do that, engaged with that. It almost exclusively is a feature that's only ever really been welcome in sports commentary. So you would have to be playing some game or maybe just watching some game being played of some sports-like event like 2K25, Dota, things like that. Certainly it might make some sense too if you're watching other esports people play. But actually, like, commentating on something you're actually engaging with seems like that would be very demanding and unlikely to actually happen. You could be watching playback of gameplay footage you played before. But even there, I don't imagine, unless you're a very high-level player playing something like Marvel Rivals, I don't think you're going to have a lot of commentary to make there. It is a little surprising that there aren't more commentators on video game gameplay in general, but yeah, at some point we may see that start to happen where you have people just straight up freebooting and stealing other people's content and then making a slightly better fair use argument that still probably wouldn't hold up in court, that they're adding commentary by drawing over the screen, even if they are just saying mindless things that don't really matter as far as commentary goes. Heck, if football and sports companies didn't have such good copyright lawyers, people would be doing that all the time around live action sports. NFL type sports all the time. That being said, the Telestrator program clearly has some advantage in use in at least educational aspects, whether that is directly working in the educational field or working in business and then educating people in general. And if it works easy and it works well, it is certainly just a fancy thing you can always have. You probably are dedicating a tablet to that fact, to that use exclusively, though. Which is probably not a big loss for anybody that would want to do that. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting plugin, and it does remind me that I probably should go and look and see if there are any new OBS plugins that might be worth playing around with if I ever have any free time to play around with OBS plugins. No Steam Decks refurbished for sale. That is another thing certainly that concerns me as far as just anxiety inducing, is that if the stuff I'm trying to sell, that's estate sale stuff, kind of fancier stuff for older people, kitsch decorative stuff, is worthless, and the vast majority of what I probably own is worthless to the vast majority of people too. I'm certain if you found the right seller, like some of my anime DVDs might be worth selling for a fairly high price, or my Steam Deck might be worth selling at a fairly high price. But if it was very much just a everything must go now situation, and like, yeah, it's highly unlikely I would get much out of it. Even my computer being custom built would probably go for way less than it's worth. That being said, there is a small bit of light at the end of that tunnel, in that all this tariff talk, which I'll just leave it at that, may make it very expensive to buy just about anything, particularly anything new being imported. So there could be this resurgence of resale and individual sales that would happen. But I imagine it would be slow, and it kind of also would have to be in line with people having money, which is really no evidence that that's going to happen. No guarantee. I did see that KD Plasma and KD in general is making some fairly good strides for their next generation of their desktop environment. So yeah, at some point, if we got a SteamOS 4.0 that went from KD Plasma to, I think it might be called KD Union, might be the next one. There could be some tweaks and improvements there. Although, I still don't imagine there's going to be anything too different. They can only really move so fast. They only have so many programmers working on the project. What is the... Are we up to Bluetooth 6? I think we might be. Did they put out some kind of firmware that updated the Bluetooth? Let's look that up. Let's Google what Bluetooth 5.3 is and where that standard Let's see. I'm hoping for like a Wikipedia answer here, but nope. And that didn't even want to work. This is going to be a wall of text. Seems like the advertising has been enhanced as far as announcing new devices and what are available. It seems like the encryption key size control has been enhanced. You can apparently separate connections, which would be to say if you're an audio device you might demand more bandwidth than something slower that doesn't need that much. Apparently they got rid of the alternative MAC and physical amp extensions. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think that's Bluetooth 6. This Aurora Cast is the new big thing around Bluetooth. Though, and I believe this comes with 6, where you can share audio from one device such as a TV to multiple headphones. Potentially this fixes a major problem in stadiums and churches and things where there's more proprietary, probably radio frequency signals that are being sent to transmitters for people who want alternative language or who are deaf, where now you literally would just have a Bluetooth broadcast going out and multiple people can listen to it at the same time. Here they have an example of airport announcements versus specific other devices. It is kind of ridiculous though that they've taken till version 6, I believe, to get to that idea of broadcasting. Let's see. Channel sounding is the other big feature, which sounds like it has something to do with audio, but actually has more to do with having a millimeter wave like location detection features, as far as finding distances between a Bluetooth connected devices, which brings lost item detectors and iTags to being a little bit cheaper instead of putting in their own proprietary different technologies. But yeah, clearly AuroraCast is the big thing here. And it's probably going to be a couple of months before you start to see a lot of AuroraCast actual products come out. And I don't think it's going to be as easy for they're better integrating with hearing aids. I don't think it's going to be particularly easy to just add it to existing devices without putting in new hardware. We never really got to the point where hearing aids started to get any cheaper in the United States either, being there's still very much a monopoly around good hearing aid manufacturers versus cheap projects that are just going to amplify everything and potentially make you go more deaf. Yeah. They're saying it's 5.2. Interesting. It's part of 5.2 spec. So, wow, that is a long waste of time. So theoretically, the Steam Deck could work with an Auroracast feature, and software-wise might at some point actually handle that, which would be a nice feature. It's going to come down to how many people. I think very few people would actually use it. Anyways, it's been an hour, so we probably should jump into the video game news. This has been a weird warm-up section in particular since I've just been kind of in a dour mood. This is my fault, absolutely. I have to admit, I got sort of bullied into dealing with this estate person, and I know the second I talk to anybody where there's any chance that there's going to be any kind of negative news, I'm just not in the best of moods afterwards. And yeah, that's perhaps extreme and uncommon, but it's just the truth of it, is that dealing with anybody, even when I have like really good interactions, they tend to go sour in my mind. I guess there's just a lot of catastrophic thinking, or I don't know what you would really call it, where I overanalyze the situations and just it tends not to end in my mind a couple days later as being as good of an experience as it may have been. But in most cases, it's more of a case that it wasn't that good of an experience in the first place, so I'm just being accurate. And I think a lot of people have this great ability of copium, in that they can take a somewhat negative experience and turn it in their mind as being a positive experience, and just thinking that the world is sunshine and rainbows way more than it actually is. I think most people live in a small state of denial, and that's just a natural human instinct. And looking at the hardware for the Steam Deck is, as far as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, it's actually fairly new, good technology here. Like, they're really not cutting corners on any of that. Maybe UHS 3 support could have been added as far as micro SD cards, but it may not really matter. Thunderbolt support on the USB-C as far as hardware could be tweaked up. The fact that they're mentioning multi-channel audio via DisplayPort is interesting. Or USB-C or Bluetooth 5.3. So they're trying to engage with surround sound. Still have a headphone jack. 6 gigahertz 802.11ax is pretty good still. Wi-Fi 6E. If anything, you might make some complaints about the APU and CPU, but in practical application, I don't think there's a problem there either. Just as a really nice designed computer, handheld computer that was clearly made by people who actually care about handheld computers. Anyways, let's go through the video game news. Video Games Chronicle news. Let's see, I don't imagine that there's too much new today on this Wednesday. Apparently Hellblade 2 could be released for PS5 pretty soon, it's being claimed. It's very believable. Hellblade 2 didn't sell particularly well, and was not anywhere as critically well acclaimed as Hellblade 1 was, as they were effectively just doing the same gimmick they had done in the first game, where it's barely a game and it is very much more of a cinematic experience slash tech demo on doing a lot of motion capture and face capture stuff and being very artistic with Dutch angles and the cameras and everything like that. I still feel like Ninja Theory as a company at this point really seems to only be interested in doing motion capture, so it would, in my mind, make a lot of sense to have Ninja Theory just be the team that does the motion capture footage for several of Microsoft's subsidiaries. Inherently, had there been a single live action intro to Fallout 4 or Starfield, certainly Starfield is a new series you could have experimented there, that would make sense. If you had Ninja Theory doing cutscenes for Call of Duty games with Activision and Blizzard, that would have worked fairly well too. If they're doing live action cutscenes for Master Chief and Halo Infinite, like, all of that could have added some polish. Even if they had just thrown in some work for that vampire game that failed pretty miserably, all of those would have been nice, at least teaser trailers, if not the initial cutscenes to the game, to say, hey, let's just bring up the amount of bullshots, is the phrase that's been coined, screenshots that aren't really screenshots of gameplay. But yeah, frankly, you could have had Ninja Theory just do interstitials during presentations at like E3, or not E3, but Video Game Awards and other announcements, Xbox Directs, things like that. It may very well be the case that Ninja Theory doesn't have any interest in working on projects that they don't directly control. It may be that Ninja Theory is just too artistic for their own good. It may be that their team is just not big enough and Microsoft doesn't want to have them grow and create a whole new team that's going to have a different dynamic. But that may be the only options too, because the other option would be for Ninja Theory to eventually just be shut down, which is the path that is likely going on right now. They'll get some more sales with Hellblade 2. Heck, they might even make a Hellblade 3. But I imagine it will just be diminished returns. I can't imagine that they can make a new game that plays any different or feels any different and isn't just going to be shackled by the high demand for high visuals that they've set themselves up for. Fallout Star claims Season 2 blows the first one out of the water. Walter Goggins thinks Fallout Season 2 will outdo the extraordinary first season. Overall, that's probably a good statement of support from an actor. You have to take it with a huge grain of salt, and that the actor may be forced to say positive things or may very well have reasons to promote positivity around the second season. One hopes it's true. Of course, there is also a possibility that Walter Goggins' opinion might be completely out of line with the majority of Fallout TV show fans, which is also potentially an issue. Months and months later, I have to admit, I remember very, very little of the Fallout TV series. So I could see potentially even wanting to rewatch it before season 2. But even doing that, I know it is going to be a kind of short experience because you're jumping between 3 or 4 different characters, and there's a lot of side distraction stuff, very much in line with the way Fallout games are typically played, instead of there being a overarching main focus and main story there. As I'm trying to think about the Fallout TV series, I know that there was the whole incest joke in the very first one that was talked about a little bit and doesn't really play a big role. I know there was a big fish monster in one scene. I know they were in a grocery store with zombies, ghouls in one scene. I know there was a lot of Brotherhood of Steel scenes that were perhaps the least interesting. Let's see. I know they got into a different vault at one point, and that seemed like kind of a throwaway experience too. It did feel like the Fallout TV series, every episode was almost standalone experience in a lot of ways. But yeah, the overarching plot about finding the father really took a fairly large backstory, and the overarching plot of what happened in the past that caused the Fallout universe to exist was covered a little bit more than the games ever wanted to cover it. So yeah, I don't really have any negativity to spew as far as the second season. I hope it's great. If anything, I kind of hope that the writers of the TV series can do something great that takes the Fallout universe in a different direction, where we don't see a Fallout 5 that is once again just kind of repeating some bullet points that we saw in Fallout 4, that really were kind of just repeating some bullet points that we saw in Fallout 3. Ever since Bethesda has been in charge of the Fallout series, it really has just been the same general concepts. You're a kid looking for your father in Fallout 3. You're a father or mother looking for a kid in Fallout 4. The TV series, you follow a daughter looking for her father. It's very much hitting on the same note. The only one that's different is Fallout New Vegas, where you're a courier who gets betrayed and shot in the head, and is just generally, I think, looking for a purpose in life, if not revenge, as far as the main story plot goes. And then Fallout 1, you're a vault dweller looking for a water processing chip. And Fallout 2, I think maybe you're fighting against a horde of oncoming super mutants or something like that. But yeah, there's a lot established to like in the Fallout universe, but then there's also some concepts that just need better tweaking. In particular, when we start to think about Fallout 5 as a potential new game. Like every Obsidian game, like the next Elder Scrolls game, like a potential sequel and or just update to Starfield, each one of those games needs to take a step back, scale it down, focus on what's important, and not just try to hand us a giant, mostly empty sandbox of a game that is running on an engine that does not matter anymore, and a concept of such open RPG possibilities, when in reality most gamers have been trained to not actually seek out the variety of possibilities in RPG elements. Nowadays, most gamers, when they think role-playing, they are not thinking that you're a character or a player around the table playing Dungeons and Dragons with a character sheet that just can say and do anything and have a dungeon master decide whether or not it works. They are thinking, when you play a video game and you play role-playing, you have a character and it's going to have some stats and some skills. Those stats and skills are going to go up. That's the maximum limit as far as most gamers care as far as role-playing these days. The actual narrative of the game should be much more linear. And definitely, even in Fallout 3, the 2 times I've played it, it would have been much better if there was more of a controlling factor that forced me to more locations and check out more things. I did a lot better the second time I played Fallout 3, but first time I played, I missed half of the locations and half of the content, and the game was more than happy to let me see the credits, and this was before Fallout 3 got an update to let you continue playing after the credits. So it was more than happy to let me end my game completely, having only seen about half of the locations. Yeah. Inherently, the TV series, being a controlled linear experience, is going to make everybody who watched the TV series experience all the same things, and it's going to let the TV series focus way more. That being said, I also don't want to see a Fallout TV series just completely replace the Fallout games. I think that would be kind of ridiculous and kind of pointless as far as it goes. And I wouldn't want to see something super crazy where we see the actors in live action somehow being put into the cutscenes of a Fallout 5. Like, you could do that in the intro, certainly, but you'd probably want new characters, and you couldn't do live action the whole time. Moving on, Hideo Kojima will share new Death Stranding details at South by Southwest. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach South by Southwest panel announced for March. I personally know SXSW means South by Southwest. Otherwise, I would certainly have no idea what SXSW stood for. It is a arts festival, as I understand it, in Austin, Texas. Not specifically around video games, more I think specifically around music. In a lot of ways, I wouldn't be surprised if South by Southwest is an effort for Austin to be a new cultural artistic center of the United States, bringing over more of your Hollywood types, which is exactly the kind of place Hideo Kojima seems like he would want to be. It is interesting for him to do a panel, though, because I don't believe he speaks English. So, if he gets on stage, he's more than likely going to say some stuff in Japanese, and the translator is just going to say it in English. Yeah. Unless I'm wrong about that. Saber apparently got the contract to develop Halo Anniversary because the CEO offered to do it for free, and a Xbox contract mistake led to a huge royalty payment, according to Matthew Karch. Well, I would never accept or have anybody work for me that would have the idea that that would be an acceptable agreement. Like, you just can't take those too good to be true offers on face value. You would have to dig heavily into the details of it, and once you got into the details, you'd almost certainly find that it can't really be free. It's just exploitative alone. Like, if your offer is I will pay you less than what I consider even a minimum fair wage, you shouldn't be making that kind of offer. That is obviously an immoral capitalistic business decision, if there is any kind of moral business decisions or capitalistic business decisions you can make. But yeah, I don't know if Halo Anniversary was ever particularly fixed and where it stands right now as far as reviews, but I definitely recall that there was not as big of an appreciation of it than compared to what it probably should have had. Although inherently it is also a case where I guess the Master Chief Collection replaced Halo Anniversary. Inherently, though, Microsoft also has this other issue. This, if I had more time, might be an article I actually would read. Man, stay on topic. Come on. Microsoft has this problem with Halo, in that Halo, at least half of Halo's fandom, I would assume, was a flash in the pan. And with every new release and every sequel, there's just fewer and fewer people who want to play Halo. Halo has not really evolved as a gameplay concept, and it created the whole Gamer Bro audience, but the Gamer Bro audience wasn't going to 100% stay around. I imagine there is a good percentage of people who had an original Xbox and played Halo and then never really played anything else. They never got an Xbox 360. They never bought any other games. Maybe they got a 360 and played the newest Halo game, but never bought anything. So you just have those percentages go down and down and down because it wasn't a natural audience to begin with. It was an audience that was created by Microsoft shoving hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm sure, into developing the Xbox and advertising the Xbox to an audience that just didn't really exist. Whereas more natural audiences, the Nintendo players of the world, the Myst players, things like that, PC gamers in general, those natural audiences kind of grow from their own fandom and from a wider general acceptance of games instead of centering around a single game. And so, yeah, a game that comes out every few years, like a Mario game, is going to have that natural audience still be around and still being willing to play the next Mario game, where Halo people may have moved on with their lives and stopped playing games altogether. I definitely have heard stories of people who just said they had a really good time playing Halo back when it came out and then basically don't play any games at all today. Moving on, Alan Wake 2 has sold more than 2 million copies. Remedy is now making royalties from it. Control 2 has also entered full production, says Remedy. That's pretty good numbers, I have to admit, for Alan Wake 2. I didn't like Alan Wake 1, and I'm not sure I ever covered it on my channel, so if I was going to cover Alan Wake 2, I probably would just cover Alan Wake 2. But it also kind of feels like you're just going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. I heard someone talking about Cabin in the Woods. This was just like a rebroadcast of how they get made, which is crazy for a podcast to put out old podcasts from years ago, but not the weirdest thought either in that case. And it did certainly occur to me that Control in particular could have been closer to Cabin in the Woods, where there would have just been a whole bunch of monsters under control and released by a secretive organization, and as such there could have been more traditional horror monsters that you would fight throughout the game. And yeah, I think there is room certainly for a game like that. Perhaps not in the SCP universe, but perhaps SCPs in particular do just kind of demand more. I'm trying to turn off my fan, and apparently I'm hitting the wrong button. Yeah, I was hitting the timer button on it. But yeah, a organization that hunted down and captured all kinds of monsters like Cabin in the Woods would be a pretty good premise for a video game if you were stuck in that organization and all the monsters were escaping, or you were working for that organization and capturing new monsters. It certainly is the case where you're not going to get Cabin in the Woods 2 movie, so the fact that there is a potential Buffy revival, not including Josh Whedon, I wonder if Josh Whedon's Cabin in the Woods, apparently he wrote the first draft of that movie, also could show up as a video game. Or if you even really need to do that, maybe you could certainly make a game around that general concept in the same way that Control made a game around the general SCP website concept. Of course, creating a whole bunch of different monsters would be something closer to like Dead by Daylight, which that would be the genius move, is if Dead by Daylight had an organization, a single player game that could really get off the ground. Alright, well, I hate to do this, but I'm gonna take a break and pause the recording, and it may take me 10 or 20 minutes to get back, so I'll try and rush. Okay, I'm back. When watching the Duel Live wrap up here, it sounds like they may have some new music to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Unfortunately, it's still the same old, where a lot of games that you play in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just take forever, and there's just a massive amount of power creep that has caused you to be able to summon way too many characters and cards per turn, and just have to summon and counter so many actions just to even slightly have a chance to win. Moving on through the Video Games Chronicle news, back to that. Apparently Crysis 4 is on hold, and its director has left Crytek saying it's laying off 15% of its staff. The company says it has to make the cuts to remain financially stable. Sustainable is what the word was there. Yeah, I've been watching some videos on YouTube about how they taught whole word reading versus phonics in the United States. I'm not sure which way I personally was taught to read, if I really was taught any specific way to read. But I frankly don't remember most of what happened in my early school years, so it does come off with just the default Occam's razor feeling of the thought that I always knew how to read before. I just learned it through osmosis, which is almost certainly not true. But yeah, I probably do whole word reading because I don't think I actively sound out words phonetically. Either way, I think the English language is pretty awful and due for replacement. It won't ever happen, but a new language system certainly would make a lot more sense, particularly with the potential now that there's a lot more technology and knowledge and scientific discovery around how the human brain works as far as reading words and sounding out words and such. Which gets back to the actual story here in the Crysis 4 and the Crysis series, while once a major example of an engine that was doing its best to become the more standard engine that many people would use, has long since kind of failed at that. I would say the Source engine is also in the same problem. The only difference there is Valve has Steam making them buttloads of money to pay for the continued development and support for the Source engine. But you really aren't seeing any new games using the Source engine, and you definitely aren't seeing any new games use the Crysis engine. Even if Crysis 4 was using the Unreal engine, which is the default engine you would assume that a game like the Crysis series would make, there's probably a lot of new learning and development that would have to put there for a game series that is really only known for its graphics pushing elements, which the graphics pushing concept of I'm getting this game just because it's beautiful has pretty much been broken up into several other quadruple and AAA games, where nowadays you get a game not only because it's beautiful but also because it has some gameplay element to it. Indiana Jones, probably the newest example of that. Control, definitely a few years ago, would have been an example of here's a game that a lot of people got just because of the ray tracing concepts and visuals there. But then Control also has more of a interesting elements to it, and so is Indiana Jones. Whereas I can't tell you a single thing about the Crysis series. I haven't played a single one of their games. I would assume on my current hardware, let alone the new computer that I at some point need to get around to building, I just don't imagine that any Crysis game would really struggle to hit at least 1080p 60 at maximum settings. So I don't know if the world really needs a Crysis game, nor have I ever really heard of a huge fandom behind the Crysis series. It did seem like for a brief moment there we might be approaching the end of layoffs, and we may be. It is only February though, so I'd assume that there's going to be more layoffs through at least the first quarter. But also I wouldn't be surprised if we still hear a decent number of layoffs just throughout all 2025. I'm seeing news stories saying inflation rose 3% in January in the United States, which, yeah, with just things getting more and more expensive, you're going to see businesses try to counter that by laying off more and more people. Yeah, and very well may be systems where they lay off a bunch of people who are being paid living wages to then replace them with temporary workers or underpaid, experienced workers, which eventually that's the death of your game company. Your game companies in particular is really approaching what would just be an artistic co-op. So once you start to get rid of the actual human beings, the actual talent in a video game company, replacing them with somebody else doesn't even really matter. The spirit of that artist collaboration falls apart. And I think artist co-op is probably the wrong way to even describe that, because that's not really what an artist co-op is. An artist co-op is just a shared space and maybe shared materials for artists to each do their individual thing, where video game companies are a collaboration between artists. So yeah, I definitely am not going to cry for Crysis 4 being on hold. as somebody who doesn't care. Maybe other people care about that. I question why the screenshot has this just like one black rock looking thing, particularly when you zoom in on it and it just looks like a rock with way less detail than the rocks around them. It does just seem like something got covered up there. Moving on, a new chapter. Limbo, an inside producer, regains ownership of the Somerville developer Jump ship. Thunderful is split with the studio it purchased in 2020. Okay. So in that, I have to point out that Inside felt way too much like Limbo. And while Limbo was a critical darling and still a game I would recommend playing, it is also a fairly simplistic game to which there was really not a major improvement on Inside, doing just about the same thing. So now they've gone through all this extra work to regain their company, and maybe they've gained the rights to Limbo and Inside, maybe they haven't, very possibly they haven't, to hopefully make something different and more ambitious. But more than likely, the jaded side of me would say they probably are going to just try to make something like Limbo again. And yeah, that's just not going to really work. In a lot of these cases, I can't help but think that these producers, owners, are regaining studios in name only. Yeah, they're not really gaining any of the employees. They probably don't care if they're gaining desks and chairs and computers. So in a lot of ways, they're just gaining the name of the company and maybe some intellectual property, which I don't even know if that is worth it in the game industry. It might be very worth it in other industries, but it might very well be easier just to start a whole new company. It's not like Jump Ship as a company has that big of a name recognition. It may very well be a case where just making a new company would have been cheaper and more efficient. Let's see, Bobby Kotick, which let's take a moment and to remind ourselves that Bobby Kotick, I believe, is the generally agreed upon jerk of Activision Blizzard CEO that Microsoft still seems to have in an employee after acquiring Activision Blizzard, with the small possibility in my mind that maybe since he sits on the boards of several other companies and rubs elbows with politicians, he has some kind of backroom, back deal influence. It's not much. Noticeably, in the Trump administration, I haven't heard any announcement to specifically give any kind of advantage to video games at all, an Activision Blizzard or Xbox in any way. Whereas you could probably imagine a scenario where, had he caught the ear of Donald Trump, he could have pretty easily convinced Donald Trump to put tariffs specifically on PlayStation and Nintendo hardware and games, because those would be foreign companies, where Microsoft is a good red-blooded American company. So yeah, I can't even think that Bobby Kotick has that much influence. And I always felt like there was a decent possibility that the acquisition of Activision Blizzard was literally just corporate protectionism, where Phil Spencer was protecting Bobby Kotick's job. Which, yeah, I was still expecting him to retire by now, and he hasn't. So, unless I'm completely confused and talking about somebody else, I wouldn't put much to what Bobby Kotick says, but him saying EA's former CEO was so bad that he would have paid to keep him in charge. So he's just bad-mouthing John Riccitiello, which in general is just unprofessional for CEOs to bad-mouth anybody else. It is very possible that EA's John Riccitiello was the worst CEO in video games, but who knows? Like, as far as finances go, EA has done pretty good, probably better than Activision. And this says this is Activision's former CEO. So has Bobby Kotick really stopped working at Microsoft? Let's do that search. Kotick, who left Activision Blizzard in 2023. Oh, he did leave. I don't even have to Google search. Well, that was done very quietly. So now you have just people bad-mouthing each other as far as, yeah, here's Bobby Kotick. Which I still have to say, this picture of him, nice and professional, suit and tie. You don't see it as much as you would expect as far as pictures of people. Even John Riccitiello here is not wearing a tie. So yeah, former CEO slinging mud at former CEO. Is this really even news? No. But it has taught me one thing, at least that Bobby Kotick is not at Microsoft anymore. Now, recontextualizing, now that I know this, thinking about what has happened in 2024 and the first couple of months of 2025, I have to admit, Activision Blizzard hasn't become a whole new paradise of a better company with Bobby Kotick being gone either. He may still be a shareholder and a controlling majority share even but no, he couldn't be if it was acquired by Microsoft. I don't think so. Well, it might still be publicly traded. That's an interesting question. Do you technically own a company because you have a controlling interest in the company as a subsidiary? Or do you have to delist? Guess that question. Is that worth searching even? No. Yeah, it's not worth researching though. It is an interesting question if maybe Bobby Kotick still does own some shares of Activision Blizzard, even though Activision Blizzard was acquired by Microsoft. Yeah. But yeah, I'm wasting way too much time here on what is effectively not news. It's two white guys slinging mud at each other for no good reason that no real gamer should care one bit about. Let's see. Moving on, Ninja Gaiden 2's remaster has added some much requested new modes. Latest update adds a new game plus, a photo mode, and more. Is it worth looking at the and more? Scrolling down. Ability to hide projectile weapon. Slight adjustments and bug fixes. I'm sure that will be appreciated. And not sure if there was a real expectation that it would get a new game plus or a photo mode. Although pretty much every game should have that. Apparently Bobby Kotick had several things to say. He says that PGR and Geometry Wars Bizarre Creations was a bad acquisition for Activision. So two companies were acquired by Activision, and he says that was a bad acquisition, which I think pretty much all acquisitions are bad acquisitions in the long run. I'm not sure that there's been really any great example of a company being acquired where it has led to more games being developed by that company or better games being developed by that company. At best, you have something like Double Fine that would have probably been shut down before Psychonauts 2 got released, that made it to the point where Psychonauts 2 got released through extra funding through Microsoft. Of course, for every one company like Double Fine, there are probably 3 or 4 companies that Microsoft did shut down. Obsidian and ZeniMax really not better by being acquired by Microsoft. I suppose THQ Nordic did manage to make Darksiders 3, which isn't even particularly a great game compared to nothing being made. Which most of the time when a company is being acquired, it is either they shutter themselves or they get acquired anyways. But yeah, I don't know of any great examples there where something's been acquired and it continues to develop. Even Mojang, as far as a Minecraft company, has been mostly left alone, but also not improved by being owned by Microsoft. All the terrible spin-off Minecraft games, and Minecraft movie is coming out at some point. Speaking of Minecraft, man, you'd be surprised how often that coincidence happens. And I have to assume it's a coincidence because the text at the titles here are too small as far as the tabs in Firefox. So all I'm really seeing, even subconsciously, is a couple of letters and then muted because of a plugin. So the only way it would be subconscious that I would know what the next tab was would be if I was subconsciously looking at the tabs while I was clicking and opening them, which maybe I am doing that because my macro's not working. But also I think it is just a case that in these live streams I'm also spouting out a million words and I'm talking about a million different things, so the odds of a coincidence, of any coincidence at all happening, is way way higher than you would expect. But the actual headline here is "Change is never easy. The Minecraft studio Mojang announces the studio head switch. Mojang's new boss will be based at the Microsoft US headquarters." So everything I just said about Minecraft and Mojang being hands-off and not being more directly controlled by Microsoft has, as of this headline, changed. And so I imagine we will see more meddling, which is probably the right word to use, more fiddling with the concept and more of an attempt to over monetize Minecraft and have spin-off games will increasingly happen. At a certain level, I think most people have long since been satisfied with Minecraft at some update, and adding new content, while appreciated, isn't going to drastically change the experience. It's also worth pointing out that I imagine a lot of kids have moved over to Roblox, for better or worse, probably worse, and so Minecraft is probably not anywhere as populated as it once was. I can't imagine anything really being added to Minecraft that would make it much of a better experience. Fast travel systems maybe, but you're gonna quickly start to make suggestions otherwise that would take it away from being the open sandbox that it is. Yeah. I started watching a YouTuber that plays the worst reviewed games, or he claims to be playing worst reviewed games. He really isn't, on Steam. And one of the games that that was reviewed was a Doodle God Genesis on Steam, which is apparently just yet another re-release of the same Doodle God game and the same concept of just mixing objects together to create new objects. And I feel like on a higher level, that's really what Minecraft is getting down to, is that they're mixing concepts of lava and water to create stone, and they're saying, well, let's see what happens if we mix lava with leaves and see if that creates something new and gives them an opportunity to add new content. It is definitely worth pointing out that many of the updates, as far as different types of dirt that you dig through instead of just the generic brown dirt, have been added to Minecraft, and then there's been kind of no use for those items at all. On a weird level, I suppose, if you were going to really try to add a whole bunch of content to Minecraft, you would go through the elemental period of elemental things, and like carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and you might notice that gases in particular don't exist in Minecraft. So you could make a whole bunch of bricks that extrude some kind of gas, some kind of block that extrudes gas, and try and capture it and see if you could do something more with that. And you could go with potential radioactive materials and as such, but yeah. A lot of the elements on the periodical elemental chart, though, are not going to be very recognizable, or people aren't going to have any idea what you'd really do with them. And if you got all of the elements of the real world into Minecraft, that's still only a drop in the bucket to take it to the next step and have natural chemical compounds that could form new things. And that's really only going to be a drop in the bucket for all the synthetic compounds that we've discovered and known how to make. And yeah, once you've done every kind of potential thing that we've ever created in the real world and overcomplicated Minecraft by way too much, then you've kind of run out of ideas at that point. You could certainly add more animals, but that's just going to complicate the game. You could add one more region, a whole new group of enemies. That might do something. But it is very much going to feel like more of the same than new content. That ramble has only a little to do with Mojang's new boss. But yeah. Hopefully, one would assume Microsoft is smart enough to, well, one hopes Microsoft is smart enough to not drag Minecraft and Mojang down into the gutter to the point where people actively hate playing Minecraft, even old versions of it. But they are already not really helping Mojang in any way make any other kind of game. There's no secret development, I would suspect, for a Minecraft 2, or secret development for some other kind of game, which you would hope that there would be something like that. And this is all in the background of Notch, who doesn't work at Mojang anymore, announcing that he's back to developing games. So I wouldn't be surprised if this studio head surprises us all and starts working with Notch again. And yeah, if Notch comes out with something completely different but still as popular as Minecraft, that could cause major problems for Mojang and Microsoft. Let's see. Moving on, ahead of its network test, Elden Ring's spin-off multiplayer game has a release date. It's going to release in 15 weeks. From Software is confirmed. February. The test is February 14th to the February 16th. May 30th is when it's actually being released. Let's see. A Switch 2 patent suggests that its Joy-Con controls can be rotated. Players could be able to plug in Switch 2 controllers into the opposite ends. Well, since it looked like it was just a flat connector, I wouldn't want to say flat blade connector, but it's not really sharp. I mean, that seems somewhat believable, but I have no idea why you would want to do that. The only difference, if this was put here, would be that there would be a C button, which we don't know what the C button does, up here. And this position of this analog stick would be lower, and the positions of the buttons would be lower. And I would assume they would automatically orientate them so the XYAB would still be labeled correctly as XYAB. So I really don't see a point of that. If it could have been rotated in such a way that you could tilt the screen forward, tilt the top of the screen forward or backward, that seems like that would be more interesting of an ability. I can't imagine any other way that it could be rotated. I suspect this is a patent that is not actually going to be used, though, because what they have shown us, the real teaser trailers Nintendo has shown that there's a notch at the bottom of each of these Joy-Con 2s, which is what we should probably call them, that works with a magnet that seems to really just be at the top to hold tight the controllers or release the controllers when you pull a trigger. If you were to rotate this, then the notch would be here at the top, and then the trigger would be upside down, which, oh, I didn't even think about that. If you rotate the whole thing, then your triggers are at the base of your Switch, and you're just going to be bumping those like crazy, and the trigger to release magnetically would be down there. Yeah, I cannot imagine that there's any possible reason why you would want to do that, other than it moves the controllers a little bit lower. It is still buttons on top, analog stick on bottom on the right, buttons on bottom, analog stick on top on the left, same as it ever was. So yeah, I have no idea why you would have even thought of that as a possibility that somebody would want to do. Although this is just kind of a great example of the problem with the patent system, that where not being required to make functional prototypes like you once were with the patent system, at least with the Copyright Office, one of those two, you kind of need it for both. It has just become a case where big corporations have broken the system and are filing as many patents as they can dream up, and making it impossible for any real competition to ever happen. Which, in an alternate world, gamers would probably do very well if there were several small console makers out there trying different things. This potentially is going to affect the Steam Deck, even, in that had somebody wanted a layout like this and make some kind of Steam Deck-like device, this patent may now make them less legally safe to do that. Moving on, Assassin's Creed Shadows' latest trailer showcases its high-end PC features. It's an interesting pivot, certainly, for all the complaints around Assassin's Creed Shadows, that to now try and sell it as the next big visually looking game. Although it's kind of an old-fashioned strategy too, and they are probably getting paid to co-brand Intel technology here. What I'm seeing here is not particularly that intriguing. The visuals of the backgrounds and a lot of polygons and textures, triangles in the background looks pretty good, but the actual slashing and blood spattering of the characters didn't look particularly that good, and the actual 3D models of the characters doesn't look super hyper realistic. It looks fine, certainly good, but just not good enough that I would go out of my way to buy or play this game just for those visuals, particularly since I know the proper way to play an Assassin's Creed game is gonna be from a further zoomed out distance. If anything, the fact that they're showing so many screens with the camera so close to the back of the characters, that just further confirms to me that this Assassin's Creed game is not like previous Assassin's Creed games, where you are dealing with a lot of people in crowded areas. Being set in feudal Japan, almost certainly that's going to be the case, where you're not going to run into a whole bunch of people in marketplaces and such. Particularly nowadays, I think the people with the techno lust that just want to buy the newest hardware are going to decide to wait and hold off on doing that. And Assassin's Creed Shadow is certainly not going to convince a lot of people to go and purchase a new computer right now and buy new video cards, which the 5090s, at least on paper, were launched. Actual availability seems to be very limited, but it does seem like a couple of people have already made the claims, which in fairness you could get a few good views on YouTube by making this claim, whether it's true or not, that the power connectors for the 5090s are melting once again and potentially causing fires, which, yeah, we are past the point at which it makes sense to still be on the ATX standard as it is, particularly for the power connectors and those concepts. And we really should be at a point now where power is being doled out via a motherboard instead of a power supply, then doling out power to motherboards, or the connectors themselves from the power supply should be something fairly different. You know, also at the point where some devices still need higher voltages. The fact that you're really only taking 12 plus 12 and maybe minus 12 volts DC to run a video card is kind of crazy. If they dumped that up to 24 volts DC and negative 24 volts DC, then you would have potentially a differential there of 48 volts to work with. But yeah, at a certain level there is an argument to even 120 volts DC being a standard. It would be easier on transformers certainly to turn 120 volts into 124 volts DC and then have a motherboard split 120 volts down to 60 volts and then have it split further down from 60 to 30 to 15 to 7 to 3.5 to 1.75. You could very much have a tree root architecture there. But yeah, most components still really are working within the 5 volt standard or the 3 volt standard. Some of the components in computers are getting down to 1.3, 1.5 volts. So if you were going to make a video card that was taking in 48 volts, you very quickly, for all of the third-party chips that you would have to put into the circuitry, would have to split it back down from potentially 24 volts to 5 volts in multiple paths. But clearly they need to do something more. They need thicker wires, better connectors. It is crazy that the data and the power are separate connectors for a video card when there's just really not as much of a need for that. Moving on, a classic Sony rhythm action game could be marching to PlayStation Plus. Patapon 3 update seemingly hints at plans for PlayStation 3 Plus release. This might be an interesting indication of them caring a little bit more about some of their older titles as far as PlayStation goes. Let's see, PlayStation State of Play returns this Wednesday with a 40-minute show, which after that outage, I can't help but feel like that's going to steal some of the steam from the sales of this State of Play. It'd be intriguing if they announced a whole bunch of new games, and it's possible they could do that, but also wouldn't be surprised if it's 40 minutes of advertisements for games that have pretty much already been announced. I would assume for 40 minutes you're going to get at least one new game announcement. A new PS5 and Astrobot bundle is reportedly coming soon. I'd assume that this means you would just be buying a PS5 and getting a copy of Astrobot. I definitely was thinking whether or not now would be a good time to buy a PlayStation 5 or not, and not for me particularly. I wouldn't do that, but yeah, I kind of have a hard time believing it is a good time. I would say wait until at least the Switch 2 comes out. You may see the PlayStation 5s become more prevalent or cheaper after that, slightly cheaper anyways. And yeah, I don't really think PlayStation 5 is the greatest of Blu-ray players that you can get as far as a 4K Blu-ray player, and that hurts the sales argument a lot too. And there's just not enough of a library. So yeah, they'd really have to just have much more games, and they just aren't likely to have that anytime soon. Game, the shop in the UK, has been accused of scalping Pokemon cops by only offering £20 shipping options. Staff allege that the retailer deliberately won't offer cheaper delivery for the £11 tins. I don't know if you really call that scalping, but a lot of these phrases generally just have a term that society evolves on and agrees on, and I think generally Pokemon fans would say that sounds like scalping. It definitely seems like you're doing some shady stuff. I've certainly heard of other companies doing shady stuff where things are only available online and they have a shipping option that is extra expensive. It is a shame that while Amazon has made free shipping through Prime fairly common, it's a shame that there hasn't just been some kind of legislation or governmental force to force free shipping as the default and only option for everyone, everywhere. Even on Amazon.com, there's plenty of products that are not part of the Prime system that have extra shipping costs added to them. And very often when you see that situation, it is a type of object that might be sold by multiple people, but all of them are listing the price as being like $10, and then all of them are charging like $20 in shipping. But yeah, that sucks, certainly. One good thing that might come about as far as the tariffs against China is that China Post scam companies might start to find that they're less and less successful. Although, that is me being extremely helpful, because it may be the exact opposite that happens, because it still probably costs almost nothing to ship something out via the Chinese postal system, and then it may just cost way more now to return something to China, as far as asking for a return or refund, which that's the China Post scam in a nutshell, is that either a low quality product is delivered or no product is delivered, or very often it's something else that you didn't order is delivered, something completely different. That way there's a delivery confirmation proving that they quote delivered the product, and then they will demand that you return it to China, and this $10 item that you got free shipping from Amazon from costs $30 or $40 to return it to China, just because it's way more expensive to go the other way through the US postal system. On top of that, there might be whole kinds of counter tariffs and issues there. Yeah, the China Post scam has been going on for a very long time. And sometimes it's possible that it's not even the actual manufacturer's problem. It might be that their logistics company in the middleman is some kind of drop shipper doing something shady. Of course, that has nothing to do with Pokemon cards or game. So let's move on. Assassin's Creed Shadow director says players aren't missing out if they mainly play as one character. Players can swap between Yasuke or Naoi, but it sounds like they don't have to. Inherently, that tells you that neither one of these stories really matter too much, and neither one of the characters really matter too much, which is really not a good way to start the first Assassin's Creed in what could have been a series of Assassin's Creed set in Japan. You're effectively saying neither one of these characters are going to be the next Ezio, which in fairness there hasn't been an Ezio in years, but there really should be a striving to have a new Ezio type character around the Assassin's Creed series. so that there's more of a desire to come back to it. It is weird, certainly, that you would say that out loud, though. Perhaps that is the director just maybe throwing a bone out there and trying to compromise in a weird way by saying, hey, if you don't like the somewhat historically accurate but not really first Black Samurai character, you can play as the historically inaccurate female ninja. Moving on, I need to hurry up here. I'm taking too long today. And this definitely feels like the kind of day where I'm just gonna roll over and go back to sleep. In particular, I was kind of bullied into having that meeting today, so I was set to a time when I really wasn't ready to be awake. That being said, that's almost 100% my fault, and I need to have a sleep schedule where I am actually awake during normal business hours instead of allowing my sleep schedule to wander around, usually trying to stay awake all throughout the night. Could be getting a little sick too whenever it gets a little bit more rainy. There's a chance of that bringing in allergens or sickness. Video games though. Stellar Blade's developer, I guess that's Shift Up, expects that the PC version will sell better than the PS5 one. They estimate that the PS5 version sold more than 1 million copies, which is to say they don't have specific numbers that they're willing to share, or they don't have specific numbers at all. I believe it was Tencent that was the publisher for Stellar Blade on the PS5, so it is very possible Tencent is just not telling them the number. It is possible that the rights might not ever revert back to Shift Up, either because it doesn't sell enough or just because Tencent didn't make a contract like that. Meanwhile, though, Shift Up's current future is to hope that there is a larger audience of Stellar Blade fans who will play the game after the delay and bring up the number of sales, which I could see another 3 million copies potentially being sold for Stellar Blade. I could see a whole bunch of content creators like me trying to play the game, but I think that's kind of where it ends. The general consensus is Stellar Blade as a game is okay but not great. It's trying to be like Nier Automata, and it's not really telling an amazing story or anything like that. Once the PC version comes out, Shift Up has nothing else new to announce for a while, I would imagine, so they kind of have to just go quiet, focus on their Nikkei Goddess of Victory mobile game, lewd mobile game that they make and still run, and then work on their next project, which will probably take a few years, and hopefully it wouldn't just be a low effort sequel to Stellar Blade, which I doubt, or a game that is just trying to ape Nier Automata or some other major game once again. In fairness, Shift Up has made amazingly leaps and bounds of progress. The fact that they could make a 3D CGI game at all, considering all they had made was live 2D mobile games before then, is certainly amazing. But then they really do have to just kind of step it up once again for their next game, otherwise they're going to fall into a pattern of being known as a Korean company that just makes games that are B tier 3D CGI games, which would still sell, but isn't to the level of quality that I'd like to see Shift Up reach. Ready at Dawn's co-founder discusses the failed Order 1886 sequel pitch. I'm not sure Order 1886 even had a full story. Let's see, Andrea Pacino thinks very proud Sony passed on the sequel because of poor reviews. Which, yeah, Sony being a Japanese company, I imagine describing them as being very proud makes sense. But in fairness, it is pretty correct and accurate to pass on a game that has poor reviews. If there's, I don't know if there's much of a better reason other than it having poor sales. Unfortunately, I never heard anybody really sing the praises of the Order 1866, even though visually it looked like it might be something of interest. If I recall correctly, and this is the game I'm thinking of, I feel like the Order 1866 barely had any levels in it. That it really felt like it was a third of a game. Of course, I could be thinking of a completely different game. Looking at this trailer, this is not really the content that I remember seeing before. Yeah, looking at this trailer, it looks like the Order is a group of people that hunt werewolves or other kinds of monsters, and it's a cover-based shooter. Not a terrible thought, but practically every werewolf game to ever exist has not succeeded. So it's kind of a mistake to make a werewolf game. Yeah. Got a 63 score on Metacritic. Apparently he's scoring higher in mock reviews. There certainly is a point here though where you probably shouldn't say these kinds of things out loud, because particularly now I could see Sony under new leadership may want to develop a whole bunch of new games or remake old games and potentially even reconsider old games that were reviewed poorly. It makes a lot more sense to just stay silent and hope that maybe 10, 25, 30 years down the line there might be a sequel, whereas you're gonna probably get blacklisted forever if you say something negative out loud to the press, even if you think it's just like a casual comment or response. Yeah. It definitely feels like a game that is just of the era of let's take a concept and then throw cover-based first-person, third-person shooting into it, which was happening a lot in previous decades, and nowadays games need to be a little bit more than that. Let's see, the Epic Games Store's winter sales live with discounts up to 75%. Might as well point that out from Video Games Chronicle also. And then that finally brings us to the Gematsu articles, which perhaps some of this we can go through fairly quickly since we've already talked about it. It was starting to feel like we weren't going to get a Famitsu review score for a while there. But here's Famitsu's issue 1886, giving Botany Manor, a puzzle game, 29 out of 40, which I'm still interested in playing Botany Manor, but in fairness, it is a puzzle game, so, and I haven't heard anybody say anything amazing about it. A Night Slashers remake getting a 25 out of 40, which is a particularly low score. I've not even heard of it. I'm not sure if it came out to the West. And then Urban Myth Dissolution Center getting 33 out of 40, which is about average. So yeah, nothing amazing there. Night Slashers remake is some kind of side-scrolling beat-em-up game, apparently. Let's see. Toho Danmaku Kagura Fantasia Lost is coming to the PS4 on April 16th. And then a second Toby Fox X Zoom collaboration and 6-song pack are now available, so I'd assume that this is some kind of musical rhythm game in the Toho universe. The Knighted demo is now available for Nightling demo is now available for PC. I'm noticing when I stream like this, I'm sticking my arm on my chair or leaning it on the knee more of my left leg, my left arm on my left leg, this knee, and I think I literally am bruising myself doing that. I've had weird bruises there before in that same kind of position, but yeah, I guess I have bony knees is what I'm realizing here, and I need something else to rest my arm on. But yeah, that is a problem, specifically because my chair has such high extra cushions added to it, and they still go flat, that the actual cushion part that you would lean an arm on is way too low. Now it's easily a foot lower than it should be. Yeah, I basically need a custom chair built for me, and that's not gonna happen. Let's see, Elden Ring Night Rain launches May 30th. Let's see, an arcade shoot 'em up reimagining iRobot announced for PS5, PSVR 2, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. Is iRobot? It's a reimagining of a 1984 game under the same name. I was thinking it was a reimagining of Robotron, so yeah, I've never heard of a game called iRobot. That being said, there's obviously the movie called iRobot, which is more than likely based off of a book called iRobot that probably is particularly old. It seems like there's a couple of different gameplay ways here, ways in which you play, and I'm not sure that there's actually any content here that's particularly that interesting. In a lot of ways it feels like it is just kind of a collection of little mini game twists. Visuals of the original iRobot may have been similar to this and groundbreaking at the time, but in modern animation this doesn't look particularly that interesting. I think it is also worth pointing out that there definitely was a time where arcade machines were so expensive and had technology that would have been the equivalent of owning a personal computer, if not a very high-powered personal computer. So you're talking $4,000 to $10,000 in at minimum in modern value worth of equipment in an arcade machine. And it was kind of amazing that even with slightly worse graphics, how much the NES and home consoles really could do, particularly since the home consoles were designed to play multiple games, and the hardware in arcade machines was usually one specific circuit board for one specific game. Moving on, a retro-style survival horror game, Fleshmade Fear, has been announced for PC, which has a different visual style. Yeah, I'm not sure. I have a huge amount of faith in this game, but I'll make a YouTube short around it anyways. Let's see, the EVO Awards 2025 run of the show have been announced. The publisher announcements have been teased. Announcements for Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising, Hunter vs. Hunter, and NX Impact, and more. EVO is a fighting game tournament, but it seems like maybe they're expanding into also being a award show, which isn't the worst thought ever. But it does point out that any awards they're going to give out are going to be around fighting game as a genre. We certainly couldn't sustain every single game genre having their own award show. But esports and fighting games, I guess, are kind of an exception. Let's see, Power Wash Simulator DLC Wallace and Gromit Special Pack launches March 4th. PS5X Monster Hunter Wild Special Video Nanase Nishi no Can't Sleep is the name of the trailer. I imagine this is probably some kind of famous Japanese lady pop idol, would be my guess. Yeah, she's a former idol from Nagozaki 46. Maybe she's transitioning now to being a proper actor and not just a pop idol. This is one of those kinds of examples of the Japanese ads that being very, very different from the Western ads, if you even see any PlayStation Western ads. And it'll be interesting to see if further down under new leadership whether we start to see more consistency between the PlayStation ads, or PlayStation ads in particular that are just trying to promote a single game like this one is, whereas previously PlayStation ads often just are trying to promote the hardware or the general idea of multiple games being on PlayStation 5. It's not worth it to watch that ad though. Let's see, Kaleidoscope Phantom Prison 2 demo is now available in Japan. The full game is coming out March 14th, probably also in Japan only. It's a visual novel. By the screenshot gives off the vibes that you're going to have several anime girls that are imprisoned and under your control one way or the other. Which has become its own little subgenre of a few games. The Twisted Tower demo is now available. Assassin's Creed Shadows PC and New Gen features trailer we already looked at. The South by Southwest presentation we already talked about. Centum launches March 11th for all consoles and PC. An unreliable narrative-driven adventure game. That's how it's being described. Several different screenshots going on here. The state of plays, February 12th, 40 minutes long. A roguelike deck builder called Restless Ruins launches in the spring for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Robot Wars Frontiers launches March 4th. That'll bring us to gaming on Linux. I have to say, as I'm sitting here, just kind of low energy going through the news, I really do feel down on myself, and I'm just like, what's the point of just going through the news when there are points, certainly. I personally still want to know all the news sources that I'm following. I want to know the news from them. It is good news to know it versus just not knowing at all, which would be the other option. Looking at all the new games on Steam is still something that makes sense because YouTube Shorts still make sense at this point, but I also do just get that feeling like maybe I wish there probably was a scenario where I was just a producer and handing over the news stories to be read out by somebody who is better at being a presenter. Of course, the finances there would have to make sense for all parties involved, and with YouTube, that's unlikely to happen. But yeah, I definitely feel like I'm just having a less than better than average day today, and honestly very little has even happened today. It's just waking up early, waking up on the wrong side of the bed, I guess, is throwing me out of whack. Anyways, let's try and get through all this news. There's no point in me dragging this out. You can Rough and the Riverside demo is available. It has a unique copy and paste mechanic. This is a game I think we've already really looked at. Oh, interesting. It doesn't actually have, it's not on the follow list. This game is the idea that you can copy textures and they might have different physics effects also attached to the textures, and I would assume it's going to be a limited number of things you can copy. You probably can copy ladders and put them somewhere, which would make sense to reach places, but yeah. And I know you can copy leaves and waterfalls. You may not be able to put them everywhere. It seems like there's also some 2D levels that also exist. In this demo, it seems like all you're really copying is colors to activate a moonstone ability. And then when you activate the moon ability, you turn it to night. This feels like a completely different demo from what I had seen before. Interesting. This could be very interesting when it comes out, but it could also be very limited and small. It's ambitious, and I like ambition, but you have to also be cautious around ambition. Hearts of Iron 4 Graveyard of the Empires has been confirmed for a March release. There's a demo for a retro-styled isometric solve 'em up called Blackford PI on itch.io. Try Hard is a sports RPG about managing an underdog rugby club in New Zealand. Interesting animation style. It's still kind of a great example here where Gaming on Linux is finding these games and talking about them that Komatsu is not talking about, and none of my other news sources are talking about, and looking at all the new games on Steam. I tend not to see them early, at the very least. Maybe I see them when they actually come out, if they ever actually come out. After Steam updated its warning for games that haven't been updated in a while, I feel like there has been a public story that's already been pointed out of a game that where they put in their actual update that the next version is coming out in 2016, and that was their last update, and so the game is effectively abandoned, which I think that probably is the next step, where maybe updates should be run through some kind of algorithm. I hate to say some kind of AI chat GPT like algorithm, but it may be something like that. And then any game where it says the next update is going to be in 2016 and it's 2025, 9 years later, and there hasn't been an update since then, those games should be potentially red flagged. To the point where maybe you delist them from Steam, maybe you just put a huge amount of warnings overall that this game has been abandoned and it's probably not what you're looking for. I could see becoming fairly draconian in it and getting a significant portion of older games in kind of an archived mode Steam, where you had to go like old.steam.com and you would see Steam with its blue interface style and warnings all around it saying, hey, these are old games, this is not the new stuff. And then you might see a whole new Steam with a whole new visual theme that carries over only the most actively developed and selling games onto their storefront. And honestly, it probably would be closer to a 50-50 split, where games that just actively cannot be played on Windows 10 or 11 would be archived and into an old version of Steam and removed from the search results of modern Steam. Yeah, I could see certainly getting that draconian with it, and it might make a lot of sense as a way perhaps just to punish people for abandoning their games. But then there also is probably a better system there where they should just investigate whether these people are still cashing checks from sales of those games or not. You could probably eliminate a lot of games by saying, hey, your game did not make even a penny in a year in sales. We're not going to continue to pay for servers to host your game in that case, or we're going to charge you an amount to host a game in that case. Moving on, Crytek laying off 15% of its staff with Crysis 4 on hold, we already talked about. Unity is continuing layoffs as staff troubles continue, which, this is definitely more of an argument to think about going to Godot, although I imagine the poor shape of Unity, due to just poor leadership it seems, may just push a lot of people to go to Unreal Engine or their own proprietary engines instead of going to an open source engine like Godot. Let's see, Steam Deck SteamOS 3.6.21 was released, fixing Indiana Jones. Seems like that's kind of it. Added support for the 8BitDo Ultimate 2C wireless controller, and added just some basic vulnerability exploits things. Yeah, we're still waiting to see when 4.0 will come out and how much 4.0 really changes or not. Keep Driving is a refreshing road trip management RPG, according to Gaming on Linux. It is an interesting thought to see, to question if people actually care about driving these days enough that you would take what is usually just kind of a difficult experience or a boring experience and turn it into a video game. Clearly, my speculation was wrong with the overwhelmingly positive reviews. So, let's go ahead and add that to the wish list. The Linux gaming overlay Mango HUD version 0.8 is out now with Intel GPU support and improved Wayland keybinds. Let's see. I would assume it is the very top of the screenshot showing the GPU utilization, CPU utilization, RAM, temperatures, frames per second, things like that. Mesa version of the graphics driver. This is a poor example of showing off what a heads-up display is. This is a much better example of just zooming and cropping. I think you're probably getting too much into the weeds, though, if you want a performance overlay specifically for playing on Linux, but specifically also Steam Deck overlays. Apparently Mango HUD is what is the underlying software that is used into the built-in overlay that the Steam Deck uses, which is surprising. Let's see, moving on. An excellent narrative adventure, Scarlet Hollow, is getting greatly expanded soft relaunch. Gonna be resold as Scarlet Hollow The Roads Untraveled, launching March 3rd. It definitely sounds like that they're taking a second bite at the apple there, but can't help but admit that overwhelmingly positive, very high numbers perhaps makes an argument that that should happen that way. The big question on my part, though, would be, is it going to leave early access when it gets that soft relaunch? And is it worth considering that it's been over 19 months since this version was last updated? If everybody had a guaranteed amount of massive time, like if everybody was guaranteed to live 150 years, 1,000 years, something like that, 19 months would be much more of a reasonable amount to expect someone to take to update a video game if they're going to update a video game. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that people's childhoods, 19 months is a year, over a year and a half. That's a lifetime to a kid, and it frankly is a lifetime to any gamer, as far as nobody's going to really hang about and remember a game like this. So I imagine the overwhelmingly positive fandom might not be back for the soft relaunch. Yeah, that would be my guess as far as what would happen here. You can fight off pesky humans and raise spider babies and Island Goblin, a blend of Stardew Valley and Terraria. Which, that is an interesting thought, certainly, to play as a goblin and fight humans. But if it is like Stardew Valley, then you're going to end up just farming a lot more than anything else. And weirdly, I'm not seeing any real screenshots here of any kind of farming, so I don't know how much it really is like Stardew Valley. Still, it's not particularly catching my attention. I'll put it on the follow list anyways. So here's KDE Plasma 6.3 being out now with big fractional scaling improvements, drawing tablet upgrades, and more. I probably is wrong saying that the newest version of Plasma was called Union. Union, I think, is actually a different project to try to make it easier for making KDE widgets, which making KDE widgets themselves is still questionable as far as whether you should do that or whether you should just make a flat pack that would be installable on more than just KDE desktops. I think for the most part, flat packs are probably the better way to go. So auto random passwords being created when you're setting up a network hotspot. Discover Store now showing when permissions change with updates. Discover will also show if a package is directly from a developer verified or from a trusted third party. System Monitor get improvements. More accurate colors are being used using the light night feature, and then a whole bunch of other updates. One of the things that they've done is that the start menu now will not change to whatever you're hovering as far as a subfolder. If you want to go into the graphics category subfolder, you have to click it first, which is not ideally what people would want, but also it was buggy and never really worked. I think there's some more consistency around the way things look, and they've changed the dark theme to be a little bit darker. It's one of the things they also announced. But inherently, the problem with talking about an update to a desktop for Linux is that there's not likely going to be anything that's too big of an update. You get a new feature here and there, but for the most part, the desktop already works the way a desktop should, and you don't want massive power creep or massive changes like going from Windows 7 to Windows 10 to Windows 11. They don't want to fall into that problem. If you're going to make such massive changes, then usually that's just going to be a whole different desktop that you'd be encouraged to install. Well, a couple of these things in these updates might be around the Steam Deck. The vast majority of these things are still just working on getting KDE Plasma looking beautiful for everybody that's using it. Let's see, Monster Taming roguelite called Aethermancer from the devs of Monster Sanctuary has gotten a demo. See that on Steam. Civilization 7 is now out with Linux support and is Steam Deck verified. I could see that being a game that would make a lot of sense to be on the Steam Deck. Being more of a slower experience. Unfortunately, pretty mixed reviews right now since February 10th. It's been a couple days and they've already gotten 15,000 reviews almost, with 51% only being positive. So that is not launching well. Stellar Blade apparently is going to be optimized for the Steam Deck, and there will be other UPMC environments and other UPC. I assume that stands for Ultra Mobile PC environments. Which perhaps that phrase alone points out how, they're pointing out UPMC usually means Ultra Mobile PC. So yeah, that probably points out how a Korean company like ShiftUp thinks that Steam Deck isn't really the only option, and that some of the other Chinese and Asian ultra mobile PCs are actual devices worth considering using. Whereas the United States, the West, has just now started to get into the idea of ultra mobile PCs being something that is actually worth anyone's time, with Steam Deck really being the only one that's financially viable and makes enough sense that for people to start thinking about buying them. And even at that, I'm still not sure that for most people a console like Steam Deck might not be financially more viable and make more sense. That the portability that the Nintendo Switch sells itself on is not really as necessary as you would think. Depends on whether you're handing it to a kid or not, and whether you go on road trips or not. It may be that people in the United States and the West in general just can't afford to go on road trips anymore, so keeping a kid busy in the car may no longer be as big of a deal, although it probably still is going to be a big deal. So that mobility still probably makes some sense. There's a new demo and trailer for Rift Raff. Let's see if we've looked at that on Steam. You're still running into a situation where some of the games have already been seen on Steam. I don't even know what this game is, but it seems like it's a tower defense game. Yeah, that's what it is. It just has a lot of polish to it, so it doesn't seem like it's a tower defense game. And then the Steam Deck verified highlights for February, where we may have scrolled through this already, showing off several different games. Actually want to research this one a little bit more. That one too. Yeah, we'd already looked at this one. Always, this feels like this might be a remaster of a mobile port. It's mostly positive. It's free to play, but then I think you have to buy each book at a fairly high price. Originally presented by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston in the 80s and 90s, Final Fantasy classics bring these timeless tales back to your gaming library. So yeah, these are old text-based games. So yeah, it is something that's older than even I remember, so I don't think I ever actually played this. And text-based games, speaking, it doesn't look terrible, but it still very much looks like a text-based game and something I'd be unlikely to really play, and I think most people would be unlikely to play. Moving on through GameDeveloper.com articles. I think we'd already talked about this. Koei Tecmo appointing a new CEO as co-founders Yoichi and Keiko Irikawa step back. It's funny, I would assume Yoichi is actually a female co-founder, but it's so rare that I've seen an example of any female leadership being allowed in Japan. And the sexism is definitely real there. It feels more like it would be brothers or brothers and sisters being in charge of it. Particularly in more corporate worlds. It's a shame you can't actually click on any of these names. Yoichi, oh, I got this backwards, is the male who alongside with his wife, Keiko, who's the female name, established the company in 1978, so his husband and wife. And I guess you have to applaud the progressiveness, particularly in 1978, to form a new company and have your wife be a co-founder in it. That being said, they have a new CEO. Of course, I imagine these two might be very old too. Let's see, Unity continues mass layoffs with abrupt communications and 5 a.m. emails, is a report from GameDeveloper.com. Crafton delivers a record annual revenue, wants to secure big franchise IP. Crafton PUBG maker apparently being an exception to current downward trend of companies. Alan Wake 2 has become profitable and the Control sequel enters full production, which probably makes some sense to announce both of those things and do both of those things at the same time. Crytek is laying off 15% of its workforce and placing Crysis 4 on hiatus. This is a more traditional screenshot I've seen around Crysis games, and if anything, it is perhaps an example of what would have been capable of being animated and what would have been thought of as cool many years ago, and now this just looks like a skin tight leotard style suit with a lot of ribbed muscle paddings, something that you could probably make in the real world, and it definitely is not in line with the more subtle, more skin showing outfits that you would see even amongst other protagonists that are wearing suits. And that probably is a problem with Halo too, is that Master Chief is just in this big clunky armor, which is iconic certainly, but it also is just not what people tend to expect to see. A Stellar Blades skin suit and robotic armor, for instance, compared to this, is just night and day difference as far as what you would tend to see these days. Although that's not really a hugely fair comparison. I don't think there is a hugely fair comparison, because also this suit is highlighting sci-fi, and we are definitely not super deep into sci-fi these days. Even if we are technically telling a sci-fi story like Nier Automata, the sci-fi armor aspects tend not to really be animated and made as much. And then Jumpship co-founder Dino Patti has reacquired the studio from Thunderful. This news comes with Thunderful attempting to reduce costs after admitting it made some overinvestments. We had already talked about that. So that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, and then I think I'm going to wrap it up for the day, as in probably just go back to bed and call it a day. That is happening more and more. And unfortunately, that might be just a way in which a lot of people enjoy not having anything to do, is that you end up just sleeping way too much. And I don't know if I have anything else to really say. This might very well have been a great day to try that experiment, at which I would have gone through all these games and warmed up through them and then just played back the footage of going through all the games at the end of the stream. What it inherently is going to do, if I do that though, is it's going to force me to, in real time, play back a video, and I'd have to just sit there and watch it. And inevitably, it's not going to be for the entirety of the duration. Let me rephrase that so that actually makes some sense. It's not going to be easy for me to set up OBS where I could have it play a video and then know when the video is done and stop the stream automatically. And until I figure out that little nugget of a challenge, I would have to watch any pre-recorded footage live, wasting my time basically. I've got the hiccups now. Yeah, great. But yeah, I'd have to watch the footage live, and just as soon as the footage stopped playing, I would have to hit the stop streaming button. Yeah, that's the kind of extra work I wouldn't want to do. Definitely would want it to be a case more where it automatically did things. I'm also noticing that none of these pages loaded up their screenshots fast enough, because it's supposed to be a case that all the screenshots are jumping forward very quickly when I get to the page, unless I hover over it, which is just something that's built into how Steam's web page works, at which point it's supposed to pause. But instead, is another adult game, or at least it looks like an adult game. It's not in the adult section. But yeah, instead I'm running into a situation where it seems like it's still trying to load in the screenshots for a lot of these games, even though it's been given more than plenty of time to already have done that, assuming it was actually loading images in the background, which is perhaps a bigger assumption. Here we have a anime visual novel with a slight moe art aesthetic to it. Which, yeah, we're not seeing an absolute lack of those games, but probably not seeing as many as we would be seeing if there wasn't some level of pressure and censorship happening on Steam. Although it does just seem like at this point fewer and fewer of those anime moe style games are being made. Probably is worth mentioning that the latest Neptunia game, Neptunia vs. Doggos, was reviewed by one of the YouTubers I follow. I think his name is Yellow Star, Yellow Snow something, Yellow Snow Alpha. And he's a big fan of the Neptunia games and has followed all of them. You make a poker clicker game and it's still mostly negative. Amazing. He was very much not happy with this spin-off Neptunia motorcycle riding game, basically saying it was not good quality, that there wasn't a lot there to do, and that it was just too easy. Yeah, that kind of sucks. You might have some Neptunia game series once again getting worse. But yeah, it's always been kind of the case that Neptunia series hasn't managed to always shine in the concept of like what they call kaizo games, shit games. So I think the literal translation from Japanese, I think that in particular has to go away for all kinds of developers. I just don't think you can have that be your premise and that kind of lowered expectation. Inherently, people are not charging low enough amounts of money for your game to be considered on a lower scale, and it doesn't really matter as far as money goes for a lot of people, so you are being held to the same scale as every other game in many cases. So we have yet another Korean only game in this case. We're starting to see more of a trend of that happening too, where it's just visual novel games that they're not even bothering to put in other languages. This art style definitely feels a little bit different and a little bit less polished than what you typically would see. I guess I am glad though to see that there hasn't been any huge resurgence of the garbage asset flip games lately, and there's still just never been any real confirmation as far as where those garbage asset flip games really were coming from. It seems like a little bit from everywhere, potentially a lot of it from Russia, which, yeah, I guess I don't have anything to say there. I don't really want to stretch out this stream any further. Alright, well, it's been a rough day. Not for any good reason. I just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, I guess. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.